Join us for this important conversation. My name is Katie Cunningham. I'm the Chief Programs and Operations Officer at the JED Foundation. The JED Foundation is a nonprofit whose mission is to protect emotional health and prevent suicide for our nation's teens and young adults. And I'm thrilled to be moderating this conversation this morning in collaboration with Stanley and Phil. So welcome, thank you for being here. Just as a reminder, the theme of this conversation is sustaining families through a personal crisis. And we're really grateful to our panelists who we will introduce in a moment, who are really here to help us have a conversation about how family members can really support each other through a crisis and build resilience in themselves and the young people in their lives. And we hope to discuss topics ranging from coping with loss, finding hope, the role that adults can play in supporting youth mental health, and also resources for managing mental health challenges. So we're really looking forward to this conversation. Before introductions, a couple of logistical things I wanted to mention. One, which I already said, we are recording this. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, or for others who weren't able to attend,
Paris leadership team.
We're not using slides today. We wanted this to be a more intimate, informal conversation so everyone could see each other on the Zoom. So feel free to keep all the panels up, or if you prefer to put your Zoom into speaker view so you can see each panelist as they're sharing, you could also do that. I also wanted to mention that we are going to leave plenty of time after the panel discussion for Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to place those in the chat, and Adi will be monitoring the chat, or feel free during the Q&A to just chime in with your question. We want to encourage a dialogue and conversation. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Stanley, Phil, and John McPhee, who are going to start by introducing themselves and sharing a little bit about organizations. This panel discussion is a collaboration between the JED Foundation and Stanley and Phil. So excited to share a little bit more about their work and their organizations before we dive into the conversation. So Stanley, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you very much, Katie. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate the support. I am Stanley Goldstein, Chairman of SILC. That's the Sustainability Investment Leadership Council. About 12 months ago, Phil Strasler came to me with an idea and asked, do our theories of sustainability, which deals with corporations and nonprofits, go down as small as families? I said, I don't know, but let's give it a try, because if so, it expands our mission by quite a bit. And so we formed a panel, and we had 40 families and individuals live at a Midtown law firm, and we ran a conference just like this at about half the quality, because we were all amateurs. And so the results were pretty good, to our surprise. So Phil and I said, let's do it again. Let's get some people who know something, which is why I'm so happy the JED Foundation's involved, and get different kinds of speakers, truly diverse groups of people, and attack the problem one more time. And so that gave rise to this session, and I'll explain later on what SILC does and how sustainability, which you think about global warming, affects families. There's a direct correlation. With that, I'm going to pass the mic on to my colleague and my friend, Phil Strasler.
Thank you, Stanley, and thank you all of you for wherever you are for attending this important Zoom meeting. This came about last year in October. Larry Krause, who was my co-founder, passed away in September of 2019. And Stanley came up, I had an idea, and Stanley said it was a good idea. And I've had so many ideas, Stanley usually doesn't say it's a good idea. So once he said it was a good idea, I ran with the ball. So I co-founded it's now the Larry Krause Tax Institute for Single Family Offices. And we run basically tax programs for single family office controllers, CFOs, chief operating officers on a pretty regular basis. But we decided, and this was before Larry passed away, that we'd run a philanthropic program. that we would deal with sustainability and collaborate with Stanley on developing that type of program. And then I thought it was one and done. It was really a spectacular program. But Stanley approached me and said, you know something, that program was so successful, you think we should try it again? And I said, the only way I would do it is if we really had a superb collaboration with someone that was in the know, expert. And I was lucky enough to connect with the Jed Foundation, who has just been incredible in this. So this is a second program. Attending this is Miriam Krause, Larry's wife, and two daughters, Amy and Stacy. And I'm just humbled that they're attending, and it's very exciting for me to keep this going on. Jed has done an amazing job of putting this together with us, and I'm going to turn it over to John McPhee, the Executive Director and CEO of the Jed Foundation, who's going to be talking a little bit about the program, and turn it over to the moderator. With that, I turn it over to you, John.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining. So I'll just take a few minutes and give you a little bit more background about the Jed Foundation, and then we can jump into the program. I'll hand back to Katie. We are a charity organization headquartered in New York. We work nationwide. And Jed's focus is on protecting emotional health and preventing suicide for teens and young adults. We were created, this is our 20th anniversary this year. We were created 20 years ago by a family who lost their 20-year-old son to suicide. They knew that he was struggling, and they were working hard to support him, but they did not know that he was a threat to die by suicide, or he was at risk of dying by suicide. And after he died, they learned that there were some signs that maybe could have been noticed, and there were a number of people at his school, which was the University of Arizona, who were worried about him. But at the time, which was 1998, there were no systems in schools. There were no recommendations for how to create a mental health safety net that could support students and identify potentially a student who needed mental health care. And so in discussing this with the president of the University of Arizona, that president said, there's over 30,000 students here at this school. How do I protect their mental health? Like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. But I have no idea what that looks like. And as it turned out, there were no recommendations. That question did not have an answer at the time. And the Jed Foundation was created to answer that question. And so if we come forward to today, 20 years later, we do work very closely with colleges and universities and high schools all over the country, helping them assess all their mental health, substance use, and suicide prevention programming based on a couple of premises. One is mental health has to be a declared priority by the leadership, needs to be resourced, needs to have a strategic plan. And the concept behind the plan should be that there's no wrong door, right? That whoever the young person reaches out to, that's the good, wherever they feel comfortable, that's the right door. And so it's really about creating a culture of caring and a safety net. And we help schools do that. And in addition to that, we do educational campaigns and programs for young people and for their families and for the older people in their lives in terms of how can you support the mental health of a teen or young adult in your life. So that's just some background about us, and we can answer any questions, for anyone who's interested in learning more. Today, we work with over 300 colleges and universities in the country. We add about 50 a year. This year we launched a high school program, and plan to scale that pretty quickly as well. Because especially now with the pandemic, the intersection between education and mental health is as important as it's ever been. So anyway, with that background, I will pass back to you, Katie.
Thank you, John, Phil, and Stanley. And we're really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm going to provide a very brief overview of the backgrounds of our panelists, and then we're going to start the conversation. So first, I just want to thank again all of you for being here, and I want to particularly thank our panelists. So first, Ginny Brown is here, and we really appreciate Ginny and Peter and Anne for being willing to share their stories, as well as the other panelists who will share their personal experiences as well. But Ginny is a licensed clinical social worker and family life educator. She provides mental health therapy through her private practice in New York and has given presentations in the tri-state area on topics related to parenting, dealing with trauma and grief, self-empowerment, sexuality, and family life. So all topics that we hope to dive into today, and we really appreciate you being here, Ginny. Of course, John is also here. You just met him. He's going to be part of the panel, the CEO and Executive Director of the Jed Foundation. We're really happy to also welcome Peter and Anne Templeton to this conversation. Again, very grateful that they're willing to share their personal story. Their son, Will, died by suicide, and Peter and Anne, along with their son, John, have founded the William Templeton Foundation for Young People's Mental Health. And this organization aims to improve the mental health of young people by accelerating the translation of biological, social, psychological, and technological research into innovations that enable the early identification, diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of mental health conditions in young people. And we'll be hearing more about their work and their story shortly. And then last, but certainly not least, we're very grateful that Lisa White is here. It's always important to have a clinical perspective when talking about these topics. And I'm not a clinician, John McPhee is not a clinician, so we're really grateful to have Lisa here to share her perspective. She is currently the Director of Health Services at Lutheran Social Services of New York, and she leads and supports the development and operation of care management and the new Life Center programs focused on medical and mental health services. So thanks to all of you for being here, and we're really looking forward to this conversation. So without further ado, I think we're actually going to start by allowing the panelists to introduce themselves and share more about their stories. So Ginny, I'd love to start with you, if you wouldn't mind just sharing anything else you'd like to add about your background and sharing a bit about your personal story with the group.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. And thank you so much, Phil and Stan, for putting this together with the Jed Foundation. Almost 11 years ago, our oldest daughter died in a sweat lodge activity that was a culminating event in a five-day spiritual warrior retreat that was led by James Ray. She died in this activity along with two others, and numerous people were harmed, and some have sustained lifelong injury. This was an international story about the potential dangers of self-help. We went through a trial, which of course would not bring our daughter back. We lived with trying to cope with that grief. My husband and I are both clinicians, so we kind of understood what actually happened in the event and how traumatized people were. And our family decided after that to create Seek Safely, which is an organization to educate people about self-help, helping them to understand that we all look to mentors, we all look to people for inspiration and help, but we need to really pay attention to what we're believing in, who we're following, whether they're credentialed or licensed. In the self-help world, there's a lot of charlatans. There's a lot of people scamming others and taking advantage of someone who is honestly seeking to improve their life. So we wanted to both provide a warning to folks and some tools to make better assessments about the situation that they're in. My youngest daughter, Jean, and I wrote a book about our story because we felt that dealing with trauma and death and grief, maybe in sharing our experience, we would have something of value to share with others. So the book was just published this past June. It's on Amazon. It's called This Sweet Life, How We Lived After Kirby Died. So our intent is that Kirby's vibrant life will inspire others to live in a passionate way, but this organization will help people to engage resources that are credible and evidence-based and real, so that they'll have real impact and not just rob them of their money, their time, and possibly their emotional stability.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story, and we're so sorry for your loss, and we appreciate your willingness to be here to share, what you've learned and what you're working on. I'm going to give Anne and Peter an opportunity to introduce themselves and also share a bit more about their story. Anne and Peter.
Jenny, thank you. I'm really humbled by your story and by the work you're doing. I'm Anne Altair Templeton. I've lived in England. I'm American, lived in England for 25 years, having married an Englishman. Neither Peter nor I are particular strangers to grief and loss. I grew up with a father who sadly had Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, but miraculously seemed to live with it for 30 years, where most people die within 2 years. But it was a hard road for him and for us as a family, particularly made hard when I was 23 and my younger brother was 21, and he died suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage while at college at Haverford, which took some time for me to deal with. Peter had, you cover Peter, okay. But whatever I went through, nothing really prepared Peter or me for the loss of our lovely son, William, who was kind and loving and affectionate and really a charming young man who took his own life at age 18. And we have an older son, John, who's currently at Gettysburg College. We quickly knew we wanted to help other people and to deal with this explosion of mental health problems and the suicides that are taking place in at least the UK, and as I understand it, in the US as well. So we set up a charity in our son's name and memory, and we know that he would want us to be doing that because he was such a kind-hearted person.
I was, I feel, raised in a very loving and nurturing family, particularly in my early life. There was a significant disruption to that due to the death of my mother when I was age 12 through heart failure. I found that I was, I suppose, equipped to get through that by really two things. One, the love and nurturing in that early life, but also having great both male and female role models. I went on to be very fortunate to be well educated, studying chemical and manufacturing engineering at Leeds and Cambridge universities. My careers involved engineering, technology, and translating research from universities to industry and governments. Anne and I married in 1995, and as you've heard, we have two wonderful sons, John and Will, and following Will's death in April 2018, we, as Anne indicated, felt we wanted to make a difference. And so we formed the charity, the William Templeton Foundation for Young People's Mental Health, or YPMH, a sort of short name for it, which builds on my prior experiences, both educational, career-wise, and also emotional. And what we really hope to do is work with researchers, clinicians, people from industry, young people, as well as research funders and regulators and so on, to accelerate the translation of research from from biological sciences, social sciences, technologies, and so on, into innovations that will enable early intervention in the development of depression. And the goal really is to intervene early when the conditions are physical, biological conditions, and before they become mental health conditions.
Thank you, Peter and Anne, for sharing and for your willingness to be here. We're also very sorry for the loss of Will and just appreciate everything that you're doing to try to make a difference following this tragedy. I wanted to follow up Peter and Anne, and then we could go to you, Ginny. And I know you've all touched on this in sharing your stories, but could you share a little bit more about how you have worked to be resilient through this tragedy, to sustain your families, you know, any lessons you've learned in that regard in terms of working through this incredible challenge? Maybe Peter and Anne, we could start with you.
I think immediately I realized, I mean, having experienced my brother's loss, I realized, one, that I had to communicate to my family that we were going to stick together. No matter what happened, we were going to stick together. And I even vocalized it. I mean, you just have to, you're in this shock, you don't believe what's happening, and you just have to say, we're going to get through this however we can. And also, I was very conscious that my son had just lost a sibling, as I had, and that his siblings can sometimes be forgotten when the parent is struggling so much, and everyone says, oh, the parent shouldn't outlive the child. Well, the sibling shouldn't be doing that either, you know? And so I was very attentive to the mental health of my son and making sure knew he was loved, no matter how much attention was going on William, that John knew he was loved, that we wanted that you know, and talk to him also about the relationship he had with his brother, because we can all go down these rabbit holes of saying, oh, if I had done this, or if I'd done that, or if I'd done whatever. You are where you are. So communicating within the family, to me, was very important. And I'll try not to go on too much about it, but also, if you can possibly find within yourself the ability to look outwards. And I knew that my son's friends were 18 years old. Some had never lost a grandparent. And here they are with this boy that's been in their class or that they've known for a while. And he seems, you know, Mr. Nice Guy, you know, they said it couldn't be happening. How can it be happening? And I knew that their grief and their shock, having gone through it myself at a young age, I really needed to pull within myself the ability to look out for them and go to them and be with the younger people, even while I'm planning my son's funeral. And thirdly, just another thing is that helped me has been, if before these tragedies happen, one can develop a hopeful worldview, philosophy, faith, whatever it is, that you can then pull upon in times of real need of with real challenges, and you say, but I've got my belief structure that things are good, or that things will be hopeful, or that there is a God, or there is a universe, or whatever it is. If you can hold on to that already developed positive worldview, I think you're a lot better off.
Also, just to add to what Anne has said, very early on, Anne made an explicit decision to, quote, choose joy. And you may want to say a little bit more about that, but rather than focusing on the loss, but to really focus on, for example, the 18 wonderful years we had with Will, and really to regard that as such a blessing. It's not so much, while it is, what we have lost as a potential future, but what we have gained over the last 18 years, or over those 18 years, and the wonderful experience that we had. And so I think that choose joy phrase for me really made such a difference.
You can't always do it, and you can't it's not always there, but if given the option of looking at something joyfully, or saying, this is, you know, this is horrible, you have to see if you can find the way to find the joy out of it. And really, we had 18 great years, and I don't want to start spending a lot of my time thinking about what could have been, what might have been. Well, you know, he could have been hit by a bus the next day. You don't know what might have been or what could have been, but you know you had those great years and the love and the communication. And if you can find it within yourself to pull up that joy when you can, I think you get through.
And
Ginny.
Peter, I completely agree. Kirby was a huge person in our life. She's the oldest of our 4 children. And she was the giver and gatherer. That's how I would call her. She was the person who orchestrated family events and parties. And she was a big person. So when she's not there, the loss is huge. It's huge and still feels huge to me. In our situation, it would have been very easy for our family to get so focused on anger and blame. Someone orchestrated her death. And when she was in distress in that tent, and he knew she was in distress, he did not help her. And even after she was pulled out and paramedics arrived and helicopters were there, medevacing people to local hospitals, he did nothing. He went up to his place and showered and had something to eat and was kind of confounded that there were police there. And, you know, why? 3 people died under his watch, believing what he was telling them. So it would have been very easy for our kids to get so mired in that anger and blame, and then going through a trial that really was not about justice. It's simply about laws. You know, he had high-paid lawyers that were working against the Yavapai County prosecutor in Arizona that had 2 assistants. And for, you know, the 10 months of the trial, there was constant motions for mistrial. It was very disheartening that there wasn't justice. It's a court of law. So another trauma of dealing with the fact that he wasn't accused of manslaughter. He was given negligent homicide. He served 20 months in prison, and the judge apologized for him having gone to prison. So I think the anger that we felt could have overtaken our life. And when we were in the car going to the church for Kirby's funeral, I said to our children, do not let your anger or your sadness overwhelm your ability to have joy and to live a good life, because then this man will have taken another victim in our family. And I won't allow that. So what you said, Anne, about choosing joy, life is a beautiful gift. Kirby was a person who lived life like to the fullest, right? Every single moment was brimming with life. And we knew that that's how she would want us to live. She didn't want us to crawl in the grave with her. She wanted us to live. And part of our mantra as a family has been to live as Kirby lived, with purpose, with passion, with joy. And attending to our other children, George and I were very conscious of that. My husband is a therapist and had done a lot of trauma work with the FDNY after 9/11 here in New York. And we were very much aware of the impact of trauma. And he realized right from the beginning that we needed to gather our children together every night for that week and a half when we were all here in New York waiting for her body to be returned after an autopsy and trying to make arrangements, etc. Every night we gathered as a family and he would say, okay, how do you feel? What did you see today? Who did you talk to? What's going on in your head? We called these our nightly check-ins, and for an hour or 2, we would talk every night. And What was it like to go through the funeral? What was it like to see her body when it returned to the funeral parlor? All of those emotions were shared. We were allowed to be angry with Kirby for putting herself in that situation, for not recognizing her own danger. We had a chance to scream and shout and curse at the man responsible. So all the emotions were okay. They're all okay. And I was also able to say to the kids, please understand, this has blown up our life in a lot of ways, but we are still a beautiful family that needs to hang together. And Kirby is not more important than the rest of you. You know, I'm going to be spending a lot of time once we decided to create this organization, and it's really to bring some positive purpose to her death. But she's not more important than you and your spouses and your children, even though to some extent she will be somewhat sanctified, because that's what happens after someone passes. But that's okay. And our son just said, but she really was better than the rest of us, Mom. I don't know if that's completely true, but that's how he feels. So I think the ability to talk about your emotions, the ability to allow them to exist without judgment, to share them. And as both of you expressed earlier, you were surrounded by family. You were surrounded by friends from the beginning. And that's what we have in our life too. Incredible family and incredible support from friends. When people are isolated and don't have those social support systems, coping with an unexpected death. In our case, it was a public death. There was media all over the place. It was traumatic. Then we went through the trial. We were on court TV every day for months, the trial. So it was very public and totally invaded our life in a lot of ways. So coping with all of that, you need other people to give you strength. I need my faith to give me strength, to understand that God doesn't make bad things happen, but I believe that the spiritual realm walks with us through the difficulties in our life to help us cope with them. So this idea of creating a workable world philosophy that gives you a positive spin is another really important piece of being able to have resilience in the face of grief and trauma and unexpected and painful death.
Thank you, Ginny and Peter and Ann, for sharing and for so many concrete things, both in terms of mindset and actions people can take to persevere through a challenge and tragedy like this. I wanted to turn to you, Lisa. I know you're a licensed clinical social worker. You have experience supporting a lot of different people through challenges and tragedies. Could you share a little bit of your reflection or reaction to some of the coping mechanisms that Peter and Ann and Ginny have shared, as well as any other thoughts you have on how to build resilience among young people and families?
Absolutely.
And then John, feel free to weigh in as well after Lisa. Thank you.
Absolutely. At first, I want to thank Peter, Ann, and Jenny for their stories. I mean, they are powerful, extraordinary, and it definitely brought together the whole piece of what resilience is and surviving through something that is so tragic and major. And so there were some key things that actually, you know, they talked about that really—
Well, you weren't in the room when I came in.
Sorry.
We can ask everyone to mute, please. Thank you.
That's
Sorry.
okay. I think that they actually talked about all of the key pieces, I think, around resiliency. And I think just to step back a little, you know, I think for parents, you want to be able to be present and pick up on everything, and it's not possible all the time, right? And so these are things that I always think are important to think about dealing with crises, but also what you could be doing every day with your families and your children, right? So when we're talking about building resiliency, it's coping mechanisms, not to deal with difficult situations, but also how to bounce back from a lot of things. And so one of the things I think that they talked about that was so key is self-care, right? So I think children exist in the context of their parents. And so in order to build resiliency, even in your children, right? Within self and children, I want to kind of put that in context. So I'm going to talk about it in that bigger frame. Is that what I heard Jenny and Peter and Ann talk about was self-care, a lot of self-care, right? And some people found it in faith, this idea of hopefulness. I think those are key things to think about. So how are you taking care of yourself? How are you managing your stress? And we heard some powerful pieces, right? Coming together as a family. So being connected, that was so powerful. Not losing sight of your friends, not losing sight of being with your family, creating these spaces where you all can discuss feelings and emotions. That's what I heard. I heard a lot of allowing ourselves to be sad, be angry. That is key. That is key. Not just, and I want to put it in frame of when Ginny and Peter and Anna talking about it, they were talking about it for the sense of loss, but it's just in general. We have to allow ourselves to, and our children, right, to talk about anger, sadness. These are things that sometimes we're afraid of, right? Because we don't want our kids to be sad. We don't want them to be angry for sure. But it's important for us to create spaces for that and be able to hold that. I think that is so key. The other thing that I think is important is to think about how we're reacting to each other. And I heard a lot of that in these conversations. So the sensitive responsiveness that I kept hearing from Jenny and Peter and Ann, even in their interactions with their children around them, being sensitive and responsive, being able to how are you feeling? What's going on with you? These are so important, right? And then I think when we're thinking about building and thinking about resiliency, if you need some help, it's important to say and listen. I need help, say it out loud. And for your children, right, creating the space so that they can say that they need some assistance as well. And I heard a lot of that, right? Holding space, you know, what do you need? I kept hearing, I heard Jenny say that a lot just now. What do you need? And I think those are key pieces when we're talking about resiliency.
Katie, you want me to? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you,
well,
Lisa.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Thanks everybody for the discussion. I'll just add a couple of things. You know, from our perspective at JED, we do a lot of work around teens, high school students, and how to build resilience and coping skills and sort of an ability to deal with uncertainty, which is of course a significant issue with the pandemic. And so some things that have been mentioned that I'd like to build on. One is, you know, the extent to which young people have adults in their lives who are not their parents, that they have, you know, strong relationships with is quite protective. So really, you know, looking to build those kinds of connections and relationships. And in the context of this pandemic, I think we have an opportunity where, you know, really sort of fostering the connections between young people and older people. If the young people are fortunate enough to have grandparents and aunts and uncles or great aunts and uncles, can be a very strong mutually beneficial relationship and even give some purpose. We know that faith in the suicide prevention field, we know that faith is protective. Religion is protective, purpose is protective, you know, so whatever can be done to foster or develop that. And also independent living skills. So actually just simple things. So what can families do with young people? You know, let them wake themselves up in the morning, know how to do laundry, know how to manage money, know how to manage their own clock, advocate for themselves. You know, those kind of independent living skills, social, emotional skills, all build towards resilience and an ability to cope. So those are some things that I would add in a broader lens in terms of thinking about how we can help young people develop these kinds of skills. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and I'm saying this in the context of the pandemic and the loss and the grief and these kinds of things, the young people in our lives often learn how to through the modeling that we as older adults and parents show, right? So the choice of joy, for example, and it's okay to share your emotions, and we're going to share that kind of modeling. they're going to learn more from that modeling than from what we tell them, right? And so, that's incredibly important as we look to help young people develop into resilient older adults.
Thank you,
Can
John.
I,
Yeah,
can I
we
say something? I think it's important for us to recognize that your children. And so if there's some key things to pay attention to is their behavior. If you see something that is different, or maybe there's a change in their behavior, especially I think during this pandemic, it's key to observe the behavior. And if you see something, maybe they're spending a little more time alone, maybe they are being a little more distant, they're not talking to their friends as much, not on that FaceTime. You want to ask questions. I always think the check-in is so important. How are you doing? And I know with adolescents and young adults, it's very difficult because they seem like they're not interested in their parents, but they are, right? They want you to ask questions. Yes, they want you to nag them a little because they expect that, because in their minds, that means you care. And so, yes, you can probe a little, of course, giving them a little space, but they do expect a certain level of you asking questions and asking about their friends, asking about what their interests are. It's important that you trust, because you know your kid. You've been living with them for so long, you know them. And while they seem like they're changing so dramatically during the adolescent phase, it is so important that you still check in. They still need you in that space. And I think that's the confusing part when we think about adolescents, because they are distancing, they're actually socializing with other people, but their ability to do that is because they feel safe with you. And so at the end, it's imperative. And again, this is very around adolescent development. I don't want to negate anybody's experiences because you can't fix everything, right? But it's important for you to know this, because I think adolescent time is so difficult. It's very difficult for parents.
Yes, I wanted to go back to you, Peter and Anne and Ginny. So maybe Peter and Anne, if you have reactions to what was shared by Lisa or John, or also other resources and tools that were helpful to you that you want to share about.
Well, I'd just like to add that shortly after Kirby's death, we went to our son's house in Connecticut, and their 2.5-year-old, it was right before Halloween. And one of the most beautiful pictures I have is of me jumping in the leaves with her. Now, you're talking about choosing to do things that you don't really feel like doing, but you're there. I have this beautiful little one in front of me who's playful and joyful and is inviting me to collect the leaves with her and jump in them. And it's my favorite picture. It's my absolute favorite picture because it reminds me that it's possible to feel that joy even when you're so devastated. So I think part of resilience is also forcing yourself to be in some situations sometimes that you might not just deliberately choose, but they're in front of you. So go for it. Get together with that friend, invite that person over, and they may say stupid stuff. They may say things that, you're like, oh, you don't get it. You don't understand. And people will, because they're not in your shoes. They don't understand. And that's okay. But you don't want to negate the love and care and concern that they have for you. So sometimes when you hear something that feels insensitive, you have to go to the intent of the person who's there with you to gain the value of the gift that they're trying to give you, even if it might not be exactly what you need at that particular moment. That's okay. But I think sometimes people get upset when they're in this grief situation and others haven't experienced what they've experienced, so they don't get it. And that's okay. They don't necessarily have to get it, but they still have to be there for you, to love you.
Peter.
Yeah, I think, building on the self-care, the family and emotional relationships, and the interpersonal relationships with friends, I think there is a very tight correlation between those factors and the biological factors that are going on in the human body. And these happen across the life course. And in starting the charity, what I've done for the last 2 years or so is read the scientific literature, particularly around the biological mechanisms. And it's fascinating. It seems that there are, if you like, 5 systems that, or systems of factors. So there is what goes on in the mind, so the behavior, the cognition, and those sorts of factors. There's the biological system, so the immune system, the endocrine system, and so on. And then there's how the environment that an individual experiences, whether it's the physical environment, the emotional environment, and so on. There's their underlying health conditions and their choices and actions around things like diet, sleep, exercise, and so on. And what I found is, if we're looking at, for example, depression, which can lead to suicide, the individual's emotional environment from fetal development through infancy is a really key thing in terms of what's called epigenetics, so how genes are switched on or off. So if someone in infancy experiences early life adversity, that can switch genes on and off so that they develop a more aggressive immune response, which in turn has consequences for the development of depression later in life. Similarly, that emotional environment can lead to chronic stress, which in turn affects the endocrine system, leading to raised levels of the hormone cortisol, which can then, again, lead to inflammation, lead to dysregulation of certain systems. Underlying health conditions like inflammatory diseases, perhaps Lyme disease, the use of antibiotics, obesity, and so on, all of these things can create situations in the body where systems become dysfunctional. And so I suppose in terms of helping young people to build resilience, things like diets to ensure a healthy gut microbiota, minimizing, not acute, because a small amount of acute stress from time to time is a good thing, but chronic stress over time should be minimized if at all possible. Trying to reduce levels of inflammation, and also exercise. Exercise is amazingly powerful in terms of building resilience to depression, whether it's increasing the diversity of gut microbiota or the neurogenesis, so the production of new brain cells. Exercise is incredibly positive. So I think there are both emotional things that we can do at the self-care, the family care, and the friendship levels, but also biological things and choices and actions that can also help build resilience.
Thank you, Peter. I want to give Lisa and John an opportunity to respond to those important points, and then we'll move to our last question before the Q&A. But yeah, Lisa, any reactions to what Peter just shared?
Well, absolutely. And we talked about, there are biological components to it, right? That medication is helpful with and responding to, but definitely importance of keeping your body physically moving and activities. What I find when I'm working with people, it actually helps with the medication. So even though you're taking medication, oftentimes I will talk to a lot of my adolescents and I'll say to them and my young adults, are you exercising as well? Because it helps, it really does help increase the effectiveness of the medication. And so those are key pieces. And I think what we're learning now is that there's a neurobiological component to all of this. And I think it's so amazing, some of the stuff that Peter was talking about, because now we're just really trying to work on those pieces along with the key emotional pieces, because emotions are this neurobiological function to the connection to all of it. And so I think it's powerful. And so when we go back to what do we need to be doing with our children when, you know, to keep them busy, right? Keep their bodies moving, going outside, especially during COVID. COVID is a very, I think it's a trying time for everybody, because I think this is the first time that everybody is experiencing some level of trauma, right? Everybody, the doctors at the hospital, the teachers, everybody. And so it's so important that, and children are at home a lot. And so how do we get them moving? How do we go outside? And what a great way for you to also engage with your own children, right? Let's go for a walk outside. Let's do some activities together. That's that family time. So these are such important key pieces. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, and I would add, first of all, thank you to Peter and Ann, because in having worked in this field now for 9 years, there's nowhere near enough discussion about this, about the biology, about the gut flora, about the things that, we can do. So I think it's just incredibly important that the science advance in that area, and it be brought into these discussions. I have, just by way of example, and this is just anecdotal and subjective, talked to several families who have had, just a child with really great difficulties, emotional and mental health difficulties, and almost out of desperation, not knowing what to do, they pulled all the sugar out of the diet and had a miraculous turnaround. And again, that's anecdotal and subjective, and yet I personally believe there's something there, and we haven't studied that enough and brought that into the into the learnings and translated that into recommendations. The other things I would just say, of course, is, sleep is incredibly important. Young people today are maybe the most sleep deprived generation. And there's some data now coming out that actually some teens and young adults are in some ways doing, better than expected during the pandemic. And one of the reasons may be they're getting more sleep than they were before the pandemic. That's one. Young people, in this point was just made, don't spend a lot of time outside. The data show that the average American teenager pre-pandemic was spending fewer than 2 hours, close to about 1 hour a day outside during the school week. And that's just not enough for a whole lot of reasons, from vitamin D production and as young people spend more time on screens, and there's some conflicting evidence about whether the time on the screen itself is harmful. I think that has a lot to do with how you're spending the time on the screen. But what's clear is the opportunity cost of that screen time. Young people are spending less time together, less time with friends, less time dating, less time family dinners. There's just the opportunity cost of face-to-face, human interaction, I think is significant and actionable, actually, because we can try to boost that. So those are the things that I would add.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Lisa. So I want to give the panelists an opportunity to answer a final question, really speak to everyone who's here today, and then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. So if each of you could just speak to, what would you encourage all the attendees here today to do to support mental health for teens and young adults, as well as their families, and to really promote resilience among young people and their families. So maybe Lisa, we can start with you, and then we'll go to John, and then we'll wrap up with the families here sharing their stories.
Sure. I think it's so important to normalize the idea of mental health. I think it's okay to seek treatment. And I think I've had various reactions to adolescents or young adults coming for treatment, right? So some parents are feeling a little as though, why do you need to go to somebody else to talk about stuff that we could talk about? And I've had to support a lot of parents around that. And some of the things that we've talked about when I do meet with the parents is that your child always loves you. You're always the priority. But sometimes they need somebody outside to talk to so that they may feel like they're disappointing you in some way. They need somebody to help them navigate systems sometimes that maybe you can't help them with at this moment, or maybe they're not sure that they want to come to you, but let me help you and help them come back. to you to talk about those things. So I think it's important because I think there's always this conflicting feeling that I've actually had. Some parents are like, oh, this is great. Some have called me and said, I need you to talk to my child. And, I've exhausted my options. But others, I can see this conflicting piece, but you never lose your position. You are always the priority. And so let me help you with that. And that's some of the things. So if we normalize mental health, we normalize the idea that people struggle and that it's okay and that you can seek outside so that you can be a better at navigating systems, then it's okay. It's a stigma that we have to reduce.
Thank you, Lisa. John, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think just building on Lisa's comments or repeating them in a way, I'd ask yourselves the question I think all of us can ask, is it okay to talk about mental health in your home? Or, is it encouraged? Are those conversations happening? And, I would encourage them to happen. And I think the pandemic and COVID give us this really great opportunity. I feel like it's one of the silver linings, because we're all, struggling with uncertainty and grief and loss and for lost milestones or perhaps people we lost. And it just gives a context where, I think it's easy to open up conversations about these kind of topics in terms of how are we doing, how are you doing? So really just to lead that and let the people in your family and world sort of know that those conversations are okay. And it's specifically around young people, and this builds also on what Lisa says. Organizations like the Jed Foundation and many and others that promote mental health to young people, tell them that they should reach out to a trusted adult if they're struggling, if they're worried about themselves or a friend. That's the call to action. And so I think all of us who, have teens and young adults in our lives can think about that and, ask ourselves, well, do the teens and young adults in our lives know that we are a trusted adult? Like we are a safe harbor and that they can come to us if they're struggling. I think we can actually explicitly tell them that, so that they know that we're there to serve that role and we want to serve that role for them.
Ginny, would you like to go next?
Sure. I so appreciate Peter's discussion about research that shows the connection of physical, the physical with the emotional. And I think in creating Seek Safely, one of our biggest concerns is that when people are upset, and we've found that it's a lot of older teens, 20-somethings into their 30s that are really searching for their purpose in life. They're searching for how they want their life to look. Maybe things haven't gone the way they expected. And they go to the self-help world to try to get more motivation or to get in a positive direction. But so often the information is not research-based. The information isn't correct. You encounter many people who are very charismatic, great speakers, but they don't have backgrounds to be giving nutritional information. They don't have backgrounds to be giving, they're not physical trainers to be giving, information on what your exercise program should be or whatever. And they certainly don't, many of them do not have a mental health background. So our concern is always, yes, people need to understand that struggling is normal. It's everyone's path. Life is hard, so there's always going to be different struggles. But we need to encourage people to go to places that will give them real help, real advice, credible information, research-based information, not just someone's cobbled together shtick to get them to buy their products and follow them. And that's one of the things that happens in the self-help world. So I'm really, really pleased with the Jed Foundation because of what they have to offer. And certainly it's one of the resources that we're going to share on our website for people to go to your organization to get credible research-based information.
Thank you, Jenny. Peter and Anne, I'll let you have the final word on this question, advice, suggestions for everyone here on what they can do to help build resilience among young people and families.
Perhaps if I focus on the physical side, and perhaps you may want to focus on other things.
All right.
So I suppose I would have three suggestions. One would be to encourage young people from the earliest age practicable to engage in exercise. One example of the benefit is people who have developed depression or children who have developed depression typically have smaller hippocampus volumes, so their brains have shrunk a little. And what's been shown is that children who have good oxygen uptake, measured by something called VO2 max, have a reduced tendency or vulnerability to depression. And so exercise, predominantly aerobic exercise, will help build that resiliency. Secondly, a diet leading to a healthy gut microbiota. I would really encourage families to try to ensure that children eat a varied, nutritious and diet that fosters the development of the good gut bacteria. An absence of certain gut bacteria can lead to anxiety and also lead to changes in the metabolism of amino acids and things like that that have consequences for brain development. And then the third point would be to try to remove the situations that lead to chronic stress over the life course. Now, I'm not saying that all stress is bad, by no means. Acute stress from time to time is a good thing, but chronic stress can be extremely damaging. And so it's not easy to change someone's circumstances, but if that's at all possible, reducing chronic stress would also have beneficial effects.
I had to smile when Peter was talking about the food, given that my son Will would have eaten Pop-Tarts and pizza for his entire life if we had allowed that. And he did have that tendency to like junk food. I guess with me, it's just similarly the themes we've talked about before of fostering, nurturing relationships that are, that the children or the young adults or whatever know that they're dealing with people who are trusted adults, as you say, and that the people that they are surrounding themselves with are truly people who have their best interests or who are friends. And it's in trying to set an example of hopefulness and keeping things in as much perspective as possible. It's easy to look, for me, when I'm struggling with the pandemic, all I do is go back and think of those people in 1918 who had far fewer things than we have right now, or ways of coping or ways of dealing with it. And they were going through a tremendously stressful, difficult time, having just lost millions of people in the First World War. I think it's trying to keep this perspective, because we will get out of this pandemic. There is a future out there, but if we can keep trying to show the hopefulness in life to our young people and dealing with that kind of mindset. And also, I learned a lot about the goodness of people all through my life, and any of the losses I've experienced, how total strangers can be completely good and wonderful and supportive to you. And I think, bearing all these things in mind, it's helped my resilience and hopefully other young people that I've dealt with.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. I do want to take some time now if there are any questions from anyone who's here today. So feel free to either just unmute yourself and chime in with your question. If it's for a specific member of the panel, please let them know. Or if it's just a general question, or feel free to chat your question. Julia?
Hi, my name is Julia. I just wanted to thank everybody and thank the families for your stories. It's really meaningful to me. I was touched twice by suicide. I'm the niece and the widow of two people. And I just wanted to echo Lisa's comments about, what I think is really important. We have I don't need to tell anybody, we have a mental health crisis in this country. We have a drug crisis in this country. And I'm not saying that drugs influences every situation or underlying mental health conditions either. But I think if we can be open to echo all of the family's comments and the professionals' comments, to talk about what is going on and to destigmatize this situation. We still exist kind of in these families, in my case, still notice that we exist in silo cultures where, oh, that happened to that family, and yes, but there are underlying conversations that we need to have nationally and internationally. I'm sure it goes on in England and everywhere else as well, to bring this out of the shadows, make young people and adults as well, feel that this is something that we can talk about openly in our families and with our friends and in social situations, so that people don't feel shame in getting the help that they need.
Okay, Mach, M-A-C-H-3.
M.A.
Mach, M-A-C-H.
Other comments or questions?
Yeah, I would like to ask a question. Also, I want to extend my thanks for the families who've shared their stories. I'm curious about, if you're not the direct guardian, but you see evidence of challenges, of depression, of mental health challenges, do you have recommendations? And I guess that question also goes to Lisa and John. And then the second part of my question is actually what was referenced around pharmaceuticals. So at least in the Americas, I see, and I say this not as a technical expert in any way, so, but anecdotally, I've understood that there are so many youth that are prescribed pharmaceuticals for anti-anxiety and depression today more than ever before. And commonly, therapists advising, well, now you're good, you don't need to come to therapy, not considering nature deficit benefits, not considering physical exercise, diet, all the things you mentioned. So I just wondered if you could comment on that as well, and how your organizations are trying to impact that industry.
Let's go to Lisa first.
Okay, so there were two questions. I think the first question was really just focusing on if you see something that's happening. So I think it depends on your role, right? So if you are a teacher or somebody in the community, of course you can bring the parent in and have a conversation, because I think that that's important, medical professional, things like that. But if it's somebody in the community, it depends, right? So you would go to the family, you can talk about it, but I would be very careful with how I talk about things. I always bring it back to me. So I would say, maybe you're a parent and you've seen something and you say, I've seen a change, right, in Billy's behavior when he comes over to the house. I'm just making sure that because I know when things happen, I sometimes look a little sad or whatever you want to say, but kind of deflecting, because you don't want to make it at a place of blame, because then it makes the parent defended. And that's not what you want. We always want to say things so that people can hear what we're saying, right? And so in my mind, I would just say, if I saw a change in Billy's behavior, is everything okay? Is he feeling alone? He can come over and play with my kids. Are you okay? Just checking in. It's always this question, are you okay too, with the parents? Because remember, children's behavior is really mirrors what's happening in the home. So I always think that, and I say this in a very blanket statement, because I think there's biological factors and all kinds of other things in place. So I want to say that out loud, right? But oftentimes, children can be symptoms of what's occurring in the home. And so maybe checking in with the parent. Is something wrong with you? Is everything okay with you? Is everything all right with you? How are you feeling, right? Checking in with the parent and then talking about Billy in that way. So that's kind of what I think is important. And then the second part is, so for depression in particular, yes, there has been a major increase, I think, in medication use. And so there's a couple of context behind it. One is that for depression, I think people are realizing that there are these things called HEDIS measures, and HEDIS measures really are put in place to measure, they're using evidence-based practice. And so in evidence-based practice, whether we like it or not, I'm just giving you context, that, you know, taking medication is part of that practice, right? So for depression in particular. And so what you'll find is your doctor will automatically, because evidence-based practice says that medication is helpful, that you are going to get an antidepressant if you're feeling depressed and you score high on what they call the PHQ-9. And so there's been a push to give medication because, one, in some cases it has been very effective, right? I think that it has. It's been helpful for a lot of people and has opened up their lives. But I do think you are onto something. So there are other factors that we're realizing, neurobiological, although they're not etched in stone for a lot of people yet, right? And so what you'll find though is if you go to a therapist, your therapist will talk about, like me, I will talk about getting exercise. I have colleagues who are talking about, even for ADHD, you know, food, so for certain foods, reducing junk. So like, I think these are new things that people are starting to learn. And so I think you will see a shift as the research comes more to light, that exercise and food and things like that also affect those processes. But I think right now, because the government has kind of put some things in place in terms of what is effective based on evidence-based, you will see an increase in the medication usage. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that that's kind of what's happening. Do I think it's the right thing? I think medication and therapy go hand in hand. And I think my comment has always been, it's hard. Therapists, you need to like your therapist. So I always tell my patients, if you don't like me, find another therapist, right? Because at the end of the day, therapists in my mind are like shoes. And I use this analogy. I don't walk around barefoot. I look for a new therapist. And so I think that that's key. And so I do think you need to do both at the same time, but not always. People don't always operate in that space. So I have to say that out loud.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lisa. So we have time for one more question, if there are any other questions out there.
I just have something to add. First of all, Lisa, John, thank you so much for your organizations and for your help. And also Ginny and Anne and Peter, I'm so sorry for the loss of your children. I just wanted to say how important mental health is. My son, Justin, struggled with it. And he self-medicated with heroin and he overdosed. And I lost him 2 years ago. And what I wanted to say was how important it is that we recognize these children are sick. He came to me and he said, Mom, I'm so embarrassed. I hate the way people look at me and feel about me. And he tried for help and we went for help, but it was the stigma. And the people need to understand it is a disease, mental health, addiction, and they need love and support and kindness instead of, you know, they're shamed. And it's really important for all of us to spread this word to everyone, to let young children know that we all feel this, we are supported, we understand them, there's help, there's a future. And, you know, the stigma is terrible. So I've been going around and I've been trying to, you know, change the stigma because it is a disease and it's really important. And I thank you all for what you're doing because the loss is forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing. We're really sorry about your loss. I want to give John an opportunity to respond to your comments and then we'll wrap up. John, do you want to respond to Lisa?
Well, just to say thank you for sharing. Completely agree with you. So thank you. And I noticed, Phyllis, I don't know if you were about to say something or not, but if so, I'd like to pass to you.
Please, yeah, go ahead, Phyllis.
Sure. I just want to thank everybody for participating. I've just found this very moving. And I want us to recognize that trauma is universal, that we've all experienced different degrees of trauma. And I want us to just love each other and be conscious of how we treat each other. That is so important, everybody. We're going through times where we have heightened anxiety and short tempers, and fear is prevalent. And so just to make everyone conscious of that and the responsibility that we each have to each other. I just for being on this space, I just feel such love and such appreciation for everything and everyone, and I wanted to share that. So thank you and I'm grateful for being a part of today's session. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. That was so well said to wrap up the panel conversation. Really appreciate that perspective, and just want to echo what Phyllis said about the gratitude we're all feeling for everyone being here and being willing to share their stories. That's how we start and continue to break down shame and secrecy and stigma that can surround mental health and other challenges. So we really are grateful for that. As we turn to our wrap up, I want to give Adi Shepin, our Chief Development Officer, an opportunity to share some perspective with you, and also Stanley, who is going to be the final word on our panel today. So Adi, I'll pass it to you, and then we'll go to Stanley.
Thanks, Katie. I know we had planned for me to say a few words, and I'm deeply moved by everyone's story and the eloquence with which you shared your stories, and those of you who chose to comment and add to the stories. I really am moved and at a loss of words. However, my dog is not at a loss for words. Sorry about that. If there's anything we at the Jed Foundation can do to be helpful to you or your communities, if you ever need speakers or resources, please feel free to reach out to us. Our emails are very simple. It's our first name @jedfoundation.org. So either Katie or myself, Adi or John, anyone at Jed is here to help and be a resource to you. So please reach out to us. And once again, thank you. I'll turn it over to Stanley.
Stanley, you're on mute.
All right. Thank you, Adi. Thank you, Katie, and the entire group here. I will tell you about the Silk Foundation much more briefly than I intended. But first, I have to comment on some of the things I heard. There is an expression in the Talmud, a Jewish book of learning: never attempt to teach in the presence of your teacher. So I'm breaking a cardinal rule, but in the presence of people who know the business, I'm going to talk about how a great books leader would look at this and try to synthesize some of the things that have been brought up. For Peter, I owe a great deal of thanks because he put me into the research of the biological aspects of what goes on in depression and sometimes suicide. And he emphasizes exercise, which I feel is terribly important. He left out the word endorphins, which is one of the byproducts of exercise, which tends to be positive. And he mentioned sugar and diet. And sugar in excess can be an enemy, and we got to be careful about that. And Lisa was speaking about parents showing they care. And even when you set limits, the kids may resent, oh, only 1 hour of TV, and they resent that part, but they know you care about them, which is why you're setting a limit. And I would add one thing about what Lisa said: spending time with your children. And a more subtle point is whether you have 2 children or 11 children, try carving out private time for each child each week. So one child every day or every few days gets a half hour, an hour, and does what he or she wants, pretty much, with you alone. And it's more important for the father than the mother. So every child knows there's time with dad. I can do almost anything I want, and I can say almost anything I want. Ginny talked about resilience, which is so terribly important. And what you got to think about is resilience is stronger than grief. So jumping in the leaves with a 2-year-old child took a lot of courage because the grief was overwhelming, but the resilience really can be much larger. And it's up to us to make that happen. And the final lesson I've learned is this is all holistic. It's not just diet, it's not just exercise, it's not just parental involvement, it's everything combined. And we have to think about this in a very broad way. Now, how does this get to the Silk Foundation on sustainability? Well, one lesson from today is we've got a big job at Silk because the corporations, the nonprofits, the communities are all important. So are the families. They are the building blocks, the structure. And the corporations are being taught now that they've got a responsibility for the financial health, the physical health, and the mental health of their employees, which is one of the things we push. And so if anything, this wonderful panel and the JED Foundation's organization of it has encouraged me to push forward on this part of our work, because sustaining families is the same as sustaining corporations or communities. And what we learned today gives us a lot of material to work with. Katie, my special thanks and affection to you for organizing this whole thing. And if you say we're done now, we're done.
Thank you, Stanley. Appreciate that. I just want to reiterate our gratitude on behalf of the JED Foundation and on behalf of Stanley and Phil to all of you for being here, and in particular to our panelists, Ginny, Peter, Anne, Lisa, and John, for contributing your stories, your perspective, and really your words of hope and optimism in the face of really great challenge. I found this to be incredibly humbling, moving, and inspiring, and really appreciate your willingness to share about your experience. So thank you so much for being here, all of you. Phil and Stanley will be sending out, Phil and Stanley will be sending out following this a short feedback survey. We really welcome your feedback and input on this discussion, as well as a brief overview of each of the panelists. So you'll be receiving their bios and some additional information about the work and research and publications that they have. So really grateful for all of you for being here. Stanley, go ahead.
The JED website and the Silk website will be part of what Phil sends out.
Yes, so you'll have that information. You can find the Silk website. You can also find more resources like Adi mentioned at jedfoundation.org, and we're here to be helpful and supportive in any way that we can. So thank you all so much. Again, thank you to the panelists, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.